Police found him holed up in a Nashville, Indiana hotel, high on cocaine, cash in his pockets, and a burglary kit in his car. His name was Raymond Fletcher, and by September 1927, he was about to bring down his own gang. What followed was a 26-page confession, a trail of burned-out safes, and the downfall of one of Indiana's most notorious bank-robbing crews. These are the types of gangsters and ne'er-do-wells we highlight on Decades of Gangsters, from 1926 until 1941, when the U.S. enters World War II. Between the cocaine-fueled bank robbery spree and his realization, Fletcher ratted on several gang members and indeed provided a 26-page confession along with a laundry list of the banks the Fletcher Gang had hit. So this is what happened in between. Wells County, Indiana authorities were without a trace of clues regarding safe blowers who robbed the Farmers State Bank at Panetto, Indiana. That heist occurred on September 8th when robbers cut a hole in the vault and escaped before the bank opened for business. It was reported that they stole approximately $50,000 in cash and securities, though later newspapers would estimate the amount stolen as $20,000, $29,000, or $40,000 as well. Sheriff Forrester McLean, quote, suppressed news of the robbery in the belief he had an important clue, end quote, to the identity of the robbery crew, but was unable to confirm his suspicions. Quote, use of water to prevent inflammable contents of the safe from catching fire, end quote, indicated to the sheriff that this YEG combine was a professional one. Recall that the term YEG generally refers to safecrackers or thieves who steal from safes that they illegally open. It was the fifth time that the same bank was robbed, quote, in the last few years, end quote. But the trail went cold fast as an article ran, police baffled by lack of clues in bank theft. That is until 3 days later when an unlikely suspect surfaced. A former policeman, no less, Raymond Fletcher. According to Deputy Sheriff Clarence Moore, who arrested Fletcher, the latter confessed to taking part in 14 robberies in Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan, totaling approximately $200,000 in cash and bonds. Fletcher was to be questioned regarding the $13,000 42nd Street State Bank heist too, which we covered in the A Minister's Last Stand video. Fletcher named 3 other members of the bandit crew, leading to the arrest of 2 men in Indianapolis, Indiana. His confession wasn't just words on paper, it was more like a schematic diagram. That diagram led detectives to stake out an Indianapolis rooming house where they were able to take 2 more gang members into custody. They ended up arresting Dwayne Anderson, 24, and Bert Parker, alias Johnson, who was either 31 or 51, depending on the source, and who hailed from Springfield, Missouri. According to Detective Chief Jerry Kinney, $350 worth of Liberty bonds taken from the Farmers State Bank at Panetto, Indiana, were found on Parker. The Fletcher Gang, according to Kinney, was probably also responsible for, quote, several safe robberies in offices, end quote, in Indiana, as well as Dayton and Cincinnati, Ohio, and even Louisville, Kentucky. And it was thought that a number of, quote, incendiary fires in the Marion, Indiana district, end quote, might be their acts as well. At first, Fletcher gave an alias, but he was identified by H.C. Webster of the Indiana Bankers Protective Association. He denied having violated any law, quote, except possession of narcotics, end quote. Well, it turned out that Fletcher, while on the Indianapolis police force, was found guilty of breaking into a drugstore and stealing narcotics. According to Webster, the Fletcher Gang did not stage holdups, instead, quote, confining their activities to safe blowings, end quote. On September 16th, Burt Parker was taken to Bluffton, Indiana from Indianapolis for trial on an unnamed burglary charge. Fletcher was taken from the Nashville, Indiana jail to Bluffton as well. That same day, the South Bend News-Times noted a spirit of cooperation among at least 6 counties, quote, spurred by rewards aggregating thousands of dollars, end quote, as they were hunting 2 additional missing members of the Fletcher Gang. Fletcher's confession revealed that the gangsters, quote, spent the loot from a robbery within 2 weeks, end quote, so they hit another bank to replenish their funds. They specialized into breaking into banks at night and burning into the vault with acetylene torches, making them the type of yegg called burners. According to Fletcher, either in the form of a laundry list or from memory, they robbed 4 banks in April, 2 in June, 4 in July, 3 in August, and then the recent Farmers State Bank at Panetto in September. One of those banks was the Fowlerton Bank that we covered in our June video titled Kimes Captured at Grand Canyon, so he jumped. And additionally, the Mechanicsburg Bank job was covered in the recent A Minister's Last Stand video that we mentioned earlier. On September 19th, Fletcher was prepared to plead guilty to that Panetto job in the Wells Circuit Court. By that point, Burt Parker had been sentenced to 15 years in the Michigan City State Prison after he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of robbery, bank robbery, and grand larceny, all in connection with the bank heist at Panetto. And Parker's confession named Fletcher along with others. At some point, the feds expressed interest in Fletcher, but authorities refused to turn over custody of him to a deputy U.S. Marshal. However, a handful of days later, he was bound over to the federal grand jury on a narcotic violation charge with a bond set at $10,000. That charge was made official by Fay W. Patrick, U.S. Commissioner. Fletcher was returned to the Marion County Jail, where he told Patrick that he didn't care to be released regardless of the sum of the bond, noting he felt, quote, safer in jail, end quote. By month's end, Fletcher's confession had solved bank heists at Panetto, Indiana, and other towns, including the Switz City bank heist, which will be noted shortly. Fletcher said all the right things, and I hope in retrospect that he did turn over a new leaf. Quote, I'm through with the life of a crook, end quote. I got my split out of bank hauls, but what have I got to show for it? Nothing, end quote. Then some resolution. Quote, I want to pay the penalty. Then I want to get an honest job, one that I can have without fear of being taken for a ride, end quote. Recall that taken for a ride means driven somewhere and executed. Well, Fletcher helped solve the Switz City, Indiana heist, so let's head there, or nearby Washington, Indiana, where 2 men were arrested in a raid at a roadhouse. They were identified as the bank bandits who held up the Switz City State Bank in early September, during which they scored about $1,500 and escaped in an automobile. At some point, they'd been spotted heading toward Washington, which probably didn't help their cause. The robbers consisted of Clarence Wilson of Hammond, Indiana, and Harry Halbert, 31, and proprietor of the roadhouse where they were captured, and a third unnamed man who was being held as a suspect. Identification of the duo was made by Charles B. Hollers, cashier of the Switz City Bank. It turned out that Raymond Fletcher gave authorities the tip that resulted in the roadhouse raid and the arrest of Wilson and a man who at the time was named Roberts. Roberts may have been the third unnamed suspect. Fletcher, Burt Parker, and Dwayne Anderson, of course, were not involved in the Switz City heist, in part because that robbery took place the same day as the one in Panetto, where they were previously occupied. Authorities said that Fletcher had been a patron at Halbert's Roadhouse and learned about the Switz City heist while frequenting it. Another reason it was wise for Fletcher to remain safely behind bars. And Fletcher's case wasn't isolated. In fact, Indiana was becoming one of the nation's hotbeds for bank robberies. ranking third overall in 1926, this despite the state's vigilante groups. That was covered in our 1926 Bank Robbery Year in Review video. By late September 1927, that crime wave showed no sign of slowing. Even as Fletcher sat behind bars and the gang unraveled, other crews picked up where the Fletcher Gang left off. By the end of September, newspapers were still reporting fresh heists, such as the $1,000 score at the People's Bank in Strawn, Indiana. One man entered the bank at 12:30, and two more followed shortly thereafter. The cashier was forced to lie on the floor, and his assistant, who arrived at the bank during the holdup, was forced to kneel on the floor. The bandits escaped in an automobile. Standard, classic, roaring 20s bank heist. Fletcher swore he was done. Quote, "Crime doesn't pay," end quote, he told reporters. But if September 1927 proved anything, it was that someone else was always waiting to take up the torch. More banks would fall, more confessions would follow, and this cycle of robbery and pursuit was far from over. And we'll be here next Saturday for more of that as we head to the Dakotas.